All right, good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate episode. We are today on episode number 151, and we have Lena from New Venture Property Management joining us again. Lena, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back in the show. Last episode, we really got into U.S. investing and the differences between investing in the U.S. and Canada. But we're Canadians. We love our Canadian economy here and Canadian real estate. So I think we're gonna have you back on today, and we're gonna dive into some really hot topics that we're seeing in the Canadian marketplace. So welcome back to the David and David on Real Estate podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So what are you seeing in our economy today? Lots happening. I mean, Trump just got elected. We're a few weeks after the election, and we're hearing a lot of talk about Trump imposing a 25% tariff on goods coming from Canada, United States. What do you think that's going to do to our Canadian market?
Oh, how does one answer this question properly? Okay, so depending on how our politicians respond, we could see a little bit of softening, I would say, in our markets, depending on what it is that he decides to, you know, throw these tariffs onto. If there is one thing I will give Trump credit for is he definitely does have the American people in mind, and he has a way of forcing that stimulation in their economy, right? Keeping their jobs, as he likes to put it there. But what that then means is potentially, again, depending on what industries it is that he wants to implement these taxes on, those industries, those areas are going to see a bit of shrinkage. And as investors, what that means is there's the potential for lost jobs, which means that there could be people now relocating. So there's going to be people leaving markets and looking for opportunities in markets that haven't been affected, which means that if I'm invested in those markets, I could see a dip in the value of my asset. I could potentially be faced with maybe tenants who have lost their jobs and are unable to pay their rent. So I could be looking at the possibility of lost income. I could be facing possible eviction situations, and it's very emotional. So, as a Canadian, what I would be doing right now is keeping a very close eye on number one, what industries is he looking to go in and implement these increased, tariffs onto? And am I invested in those areas? If I am, good. Do I have a cushion? Do I have the ability to sustain my expenses should things go sideways? It doesn't mean they will, but you want to be prepared just in case. The other thing I want to look at is, okay, what kind of opportunities will open for me as an investor in those areas, right? Because when everybody's leaving an area and everybody's dumping their property, now is a great time to buy it, right? If everybody's running to, let's say, the Niagara market, I kind of want to be running out of the Niagara market, right? If you all want to be buying there, let me please sell you whatever I have at X number of dollars above what I thought I was going to get. But if all of you are leaving and now 50 units hit the market at the same time, well, let me go in there and see what I can pick at as long as I can sustain it until the stability returns. You don't really have too much to lose if you've done your due diligence right. And I think as a whole, our current Canadian economy is in that situation. We are in a position right now where we haven't been for years, where we can negotiate. You're not being forced to put $100,000 over ask just to get a counter offer, right? We're in a position now where there is inventory. We have the ability to negotiate. We have the opportunity to create deals that wouldn't otherwise exist. And I think that maybe for us, this is how we should look at it from an investment perspective, but also recognize that our clientele, our tenants, could be facing very serious hardships, possibly. So how are we going to mitigate the effect of that on us?
That was a great answer.
That's
Great
my short
answer.
answer.
Yeah, I think like it might be dangerous, but maybe you'll disagree with this. But if you're going to invest in residential real estate in a town in Ontario that's sort of a manufacturing town, They got a couple industries there, and maybe it's lumber, maybe it's mining, maybe it's something like that. But they're probably on the front of the line of where these tariffs might hit. So all of a sudden, production's down and everything, and so that creates the opportunity because there are going to be layoffs, some housing available, so a good opportunity to buy. But you got to look at the other side. You got to be able to lease it out to somebody. If everybody's leaving town, who you renting it to?
It's like Windsor, right? So I'm going to say two things. We actually experienced this personally. So when we first started buying property, we were buying property in Cornwall, Ontario, because that's where we could afford to purchase. At that time, so this is 2004, 5, 6. At that time, Domtar, they were a paper mill, was the single largest employer in Cornwall. And I think it was 2007, they shut down. Boom. And we had just started, we were in the middle of all these renovations. We had just started. And I remember thinking, oh God, game over. Single largest employer is gone. We are so dead. Nothing happened. And the reason is Cornwall was a very affordable town. So these individuals who got laid off, they had packages, they had EI, they had all of these things. And those supports more than covered their cost of living. So because rent was somewhat affordable, these individuals were able to stay and find alternative employment and still pay their rent and do those things. So if we're in Toronto and this were to happen, game over. Like nobody's EI is covering rent in Toronto. But it's very possible that if we're, let's say, in Windsor again, and they do get packages and they've got these things, if you have the right product, it is possible that you're not going to lose your entire tenant base, maybe 50% of them, but you have an opportunity now to, again, negotiate probably better deals, which will allow you to offer more affordable rental rates and retain the people who are there. Because it's very difficult to up and leave when you have kids that are in school, if you've got a spouse who still has their job. So maybe it's only one household, right? A lot of these people who are on the manufacturing lines in the industry that's being affected, they're generally dual income households, right? They don't have that opportunity to have one spouse working and one spouse staying at home. So if one has kept their job and the other has lost theirs and they've got kids, it's going to be more difficult to up and leave. So investors, this would mean don't go off and buy 1-bedroom and bachelor apartments. Okay, don't go off and build 1-bedroom and bachelor apartments because CMHC financing will allow you to affordably, market those. You're not going to have the tenant base. When you see things like this happening, you really need to look at having family-friendly units because many people may be forced to leave their homes, sell those homes because they can't afford those mortgages and come into rental units. And they're not looking for bachelor apartments. They're not looking for 1-bedroom apartments. So when you're on the hunt for your next property, you've got to keep this in mind as well. Don't go off and buy. The reason, let's say, that 1-bedroom building. So I saw one just the other day. It's like 50 units, brand new, CMHC funded, and it's all 1-bedroom apartments. For me, I would never buy something like that. I don't care how much money CMHC gives me. Because in volatility, the single individual who can just up and pick up and go is going to go. And if I've got 50 of them and 30 of them leave, what am I doing? But if I've got 2 or 3 1-bedrooms and I've got 2 or 3 2-bedrooms and I've got 2 or 3 3-bedrooms, the probabilities of my 2s and my 1s all leaving at once are very slim. So affordable places, tenants might still be able to manage. And definitely if you've got family-oriented units, you have more stability than if you've got 1 and 2-bedroom, like 1-bedroom and bachelor apartments. So take a look at your portfolio, do an analysis of what you've got so that you can start preparing yourself just in case. Prepare that cushion. If you need to offload, do it now before the tariffs hit, let's say, and the industry actually goes through. Don't worry about whether or not you could get $100,000 more if you wait. You could get $200,000 less. Like, best time to buy is now, best time to sell is now if you have to sell. Like, that's it. Don't worry about the rest of it. The rest is all pretend.
Yeah, it's really good feedback, Lana. And we're hearing that the government's changing immigration policies too, and it's influencing for the first time. I read an article that rental market is edging downward,
Mhm.
right? So, let's talk about that a little bit. What do
Sure.
you think that's going to do to our, how much of a hot topic item is that?
Well, okay, so immigration, um, we need it, yes, but at the same time, too much of it obviously creates problems that we've seen. So our rental market, especially with the ban on foreign buyers. So when they banned foreign buyers from being able to buy residential property, the immigration didn't stop, right? So you still had immigration coming in. You had individuals who were coming to start a new life. Many of them come with substantial amounts of cash because their goal is to purchase property, and then all of a sudden they can't. So if you looked at what happened to kind of our, let's say, luxury rental market, it went through the roof. You're looking at houses that would normally rent for, let's say, $5,000 or $6,000, renting at $10,000 a month, because these affluent, immigrants who can't buy this house that they normally would be buying have all this cash. They're like, all right, I'm going to pay you whatever I need to pay you right now, and then once I can buy the house, I'll buy the house from you. That was one. The second market that really, really got inflated was the student rental market. So you saw a lot of investors who saw an opportunity to charge an arm and a leg for a room to international students because, they don't have credit, they don't have rental history, they don't have all of this. So it's like, you know what? This $600 room, I'm going to charge you $1,000 for. And this went on for a really, really long time. So what's going to end up happening is two things. A, everything's going to correct itself, right? So I'm already seeing an increase, like a decrease in rental rates, both in the luxury kind of, let's say, home market, as well as just your standard rentals, student rentals, affordable rentals. Part of this is because people, A, can't afford it. They just can't afford it. We've hit the maximum allowable cost to living ratio. Like people just, they can't stretch any thinner. But immigrants are getting smarter, and there are a lot. So I have tenants who have been here on work visas who aren't getting their visas renewed. They've been here 3-4 years waiting to get their PR status, and now they're being sent home. So these are great tenants who now are going to have to vacate my unit. And there are units that are in markets that have a lot of these individuals, which means you're going to get a flood of units onto the market. And when you have a flood of units, that means your tenants are in a position to negotiate, which means your rental rates are coming down. So you need to prepare yourself, and you need to know that if you bought a property, let's say, in the height of COVID, when everybody had kind of left Toronto and all of your suburban kind of rural price points have gone up, and you've been renting it to international students at $1,000 a room, you're going to want to start looking at a new strategy very, very quickly. Can you add units? Can you add, a garden suite? What can you do to increase income for regular, full-time, permanent renters? Because that is who your market is going to be. And that really means that we've got to get out of this greed mindset of, and we've really been there, I think, a little too long of, I don't want to say who do we want to exploit, although I know for fact that there are a few out there who really think of it that way. But a lot of people thought if I ask for more, I'm more protected. I made a little bit more money. So if I make a little bit less now, no big deal. And then we got used to making $5,000 a month in rent. Well, you're probably now going back down to 3,500. So how are you going to mitigate that risk? And then you're going to see as the market starts to correct, and I use the word correct because I don't think we as a Canadian market are ever in a crash. Like I think that we've been so conservative, we're never going to crash. We just kind of course correct. We inflate a little too much, so then we go back to where we're supposed to be. So as we see this correction, what you will see, and I cannot wait for this moment, is you're going to start to see the quality of applicants increase. Right now, the quality of rental applications that come in are less than ideal because good tenants have affordable units and they will not leave those units unless they absolutely have to. The people who are being forced to move are either a small portion, just horrible humans, very small portion, but they exist. Or they're individuals who are so strapped that they fall behind, they can't catch up. And now they're trying to leave because they try to do right by their landlord. They know they can't afford it, so they have to go. But where they couldn't afford, what they're going into is more expensive anyway. And this is what we're seeing. So you are going to see an increase in the quality of applications. So it will help, I think, a little bit, but it is going to course correct. So if you bought at the top of the market, I don't know. I mean, if you can find a way to increase value, add units, do something, maximize that investment, and be prepared for slightly lower rental.
Lena, there's been so many changes in legislation, like in the last couple months. But in your opinion, what has been some of the changes that you've seen? What changes are going to have the most impact on the tenant and landlord landscape moving forward?
So I don't know if everybody is paying attention. Landlord and tenant legislation is provincial legislation, and we now have municipalities passing bylaws that dictate how you get to do what the landlord and tenant board allows you to do. So the city of Toronto just passed a new renovation bylaw, and now you're paying X number of dollars for an application. You've got all these other rules you have to follow that are way outside of what the landlord and tenant board requires. For me, that is concerning. When the municipality, so Hamilton already did it, Toronto is going to do it, or has, which means that Oshawa more than likely will be the next to follow, because this generally tends to be the trend. And then you're going to look into like York Region, things like that. But when the municipality starts throwing their hands into housing, what ends up happening is one side of the street has one rule and the other side of the street has another rule. And you're going to see a market that's just going to go up and down, and it's unstable. And when the municipality gets to change the rules, that means that you went in and you bought based on something. So I don't know if everybody's aware, but if you choose to develop property, it is a little bit of a lengthy process. It's not a 2-week, 3-week kind of thing. It takes time to get site plan and all the other approvals that you require before you can put the shovels into the ground and do what you need to do. So if you are an investor who's going into a municipality, it's possible that during that process, the city decides, oh, you know what, we're going to throw in these rules. And now what you thought was going to work is no longer going to work. We're not just dealing with provincial issues. Provincial issues, if we really look at it, historically change as our governments change, right? So when we go from a liberal into a conservative and conservative into a liberal, you tend to see shifts. So for the most part, it's not a lot of shift every year. It kind of once every 4 years. And you know in advance what they're planning, right? Because they tell you all about it. We're going to cap rent. We're going to remove non-exemptions. And now we're not like, oh, they want to pass legislation that's going to not allow you to increase rent above a certain amount in between tenants, right? We're going to go into Quebec's way. This you can plan for. The municipalities, this is my big concern, is this is what it is. What politicians say because they want votes, I'm not too concerned about, because they don't always pass and it takes time. It's when the city decides I have a problem and now I'm going to interfere. It means as a real estate agent, you need to know, what does Hamilton allow? What does Burlington allow? What does Toronto allow? So now you have to have all this extra information, because the boundary line, if I buy south of Steeles, the rules are one thing. And if I buy north of Steeles, the rules are something different. It's lunacy. If you are where I live, and let's say the city of Richmond Hill passes a bylaw and the city of Vaughan doesn't, if I cross the street, the rules are different because I'm right on the border. So my side of the street, I can do what I want. The other side of the street, too bad, so sad. It will dictate the value of your property. It'll dictate the way that you're able to rent. It's going to do a lot of different things. And this is what I think we as investors need to be most concerned about, is what are the municipalities doing? And it could be simple things like, oh, you're not allowed to change the water bill into your tenant's name anymore. Right now you've got $200 bills that you have to chase your tenant to collect because it doesn't go straight to them.
Right.
right? It's these kinds of things that I think people don't pay attention to, and it's these things that end up getting you the most into the most trouble. And now pay attention to the CRA. I wouldn't even be worried about the landlord and tenant board. I'd be worried about the CRA. Everybody's getting, audited, and rules that used to pass by seem like I see people talking about HST on the sale of Airbnbs. They think it's new. It's not new. It's just the CRA needs to find ways to collect money. So now they're enforcing it. It's not new. This is old news. So just be mindful of these things. It's not just legislation. Legislation, landlord and tenant legislation is like a very small thing, and it's pretty consistent for the most part. These municipalities and these very enthusiastic mayors, they're where my concerns are.
Well, look, it started with land transfer tax. Land transfer is a provincial jurisdiction. Everything in Ontario has a land transfer tax. And then the city of Toronto decided, oh, we want a land transfer tax too. And I'm surprised that more municipalities didn't follow suit. But for a while, it was the same thing. If I could buy a property in Etobicoke, pay land transfer, or I could buy across the street in Mississauga, I don't have to pay land transfer tax. So for a period of time, people said, okay, let's buy in Mississauga. And eventually people said, no, but I really want to live in Toronto. So we're just building that into our cost of acquiring, and so be it, and just pay it.
Yeah, it's concerning. When the municipalities start getting involved where they shouldn't be, that's where I would be I would pay very close attention to that. Very, very close attention to that.
And Lena, I heard that now we're able to report non-payment of rent on a tenant's credit bureau.
Yes.
Which I think is a great step in the right direction. I know there's companies like Open, Single Key that are kind of leading the way on some of these initiatives. But non-payment of rent has been a huge contentious issues. It acted as a deterrent for a lot of people to get into the investment world. Do you think that this is going to, number one, encourage more investors to get into investing? And how do you think it's going to impact the landlord-tenant relationship?
Okay. So I think a few things. I think that this will be something that will get reversed over the course of the next, let's say, 5 years.
Really?
And I say this because there's a very small percentage of tenants who are bad humans. The rest of them, life has happened, things have happened. And if now landlords, okay, so first things first, they're going to monitor whether or not the reporting is fair, right? So has the reporting been fair? What is going to be the situation if the arrears have been paid and now there is no non-payment, and all these other rules are going to come up first? Because we're not dealing with credit cards. We're not dealing with car payments. We're dealing with a basic human right to be housed. So if the province sees an uptick in people who are unable to be housed, this now becomes a provincial problem. Because who is going to house these people? The shelters? Who runs the shelters? So if we end up in a situation where there's no balance, right? So everybody's using this as an excuse, and one person, and this is the thing, you have to be able to understand what a person's credit report means. Life happens sometimes, right? So in January of 2002, maybe because of the COVID shutdowns, you've maxed out your savings, you've maxed out your line of credit, you have nothing else to draw from, you still can't work, and you fell behind on rent, your car payment, and whatever. Everything went sideways at the same time. And maybe it went sideways for 2 or 3 months, and then it picked up again, and it's been great since. Novice investors who are just scared that they're never going to get paid are going to see those 3 months of non-payment, and they're going to reject the application. They're not going to look at the fact that this was a life situation. When you're using software, let's say, to do that work for you, and it doesn't actually give you this, it just gives you based on whatever their algorithm says, it says, not so great, and you listen to it, you're going to see a whole bunch of people who are good, honest, hardworking people who aren't able to be housed. And they are going to scream and they are going to yell, and there are way more of them than there are us, and they will get things changed. So if it's not controlled properly and if it's not used properly, and unfortunately, if I use Facebook as my measure, it will not be used properly because the Facebook landlords, you know what I mean? Like they're so keen on this because they just want to be able to report because they've been burned. Yes, absolutely. But you need to look at the whole situation because those really horrible people that really cause that damage that these individuals have experienced, they're a very small number. And you'll find them on Canley, you'll find them on Open Room, you'll find them in all of these places. And I believe that if they're able to do it where it is orders, so you have an order that was issued by the tribunal, this case has been heard, it has been agreed that this is the situation, there was an opportunity to correct and you didn't, and that gets reported, I think that's fine. But I think an individual who hasn't even bothered trying to find a resolution for the non-payment and just decides to do it there because ha ha ha, I can. If this is what we're going to be doing, we're going to ruin it for the bunch and it will be reversed.
I love it. I love that perspective. It's such a real world, boots on the ground. You've been there, you know, years of experience. It's such a great perspective on the whole situation, taking into account both viewpoints. Very, very, very well answered. I know. I
Thank you.
completely agree with you on that.
Thank you. Hey, it is what it is. We're all humans, right?
Yeah.
We can't
What
forget that.
else do you see out there? Because I mean, I know there's other, so many other things happening, on a day-to-day basis, that we're seeing that are really impacting, the tenant-landlord relationship and the investor landscape in the
Yes.
Canadian market as well. So, is there anything else that really sticks out at you, that you're passionate about?
So it's a very emotional landscape right now. Very, very emotional landscape. If I were to, how can I put this? Like if I were to give you an analogy. Okay. So before, let's say our landscape, there was a lot of tension, and we were all kind of sitting there and everybody's, they're hot and they're bothered, but they're not really ready to detonate. Today, our landscape is like landmines everywhere. You don't know where you're going to step and what's going to blow up. And it's because everybody's strapped. Everybody is stretched. There are so many investors that are leveraged like to the nines. Their payments they're barely keeping up. And these are individuals who have worked really, really hard to build some equity, to be able to invest that and build a nest egg. And now they could lose everything that they had. And then you've got tenants in the same units with these very stressed landlords who also work very, very hard and are doing the best that they can. And they're reaching the maximum allowable amount. And it could be something as simple as the light bulb is flickering and it'll be an explosion. And when these explosions happen, what ends up happening is, so if I decide that I'm going to totally lose my mind on my tenant because they asked me to recock their bathtub because there's like little black spots all over it and I know nothing's going to happen and it just doesn't look very nice and maybe you should have learned to clean your bathtub, who knows. If I do that, especially if I'm a multifamily investor and I blow up at that tenant because I'm having a really bad day and let's say the bank called me and they're saying, you're 10 days past due and we really need to get this sorted out, that tenant's now going to turn around and tell everybody else in the building what a freaking lunatic I am. And everybody else's response and how they're going to communicate with me is going to be based on them being ready to fight me. And then I'm going to feel that energy and then I'm going to want to fight everybody. And I feel like if we continue down this path, many, many buildings are going to go up in flames. Like literally, people are going to start burning buildings down to the ground. So as an investor right now, if there's one thing that I can tell anybody who's out there, find an outlet to diffuse your bomb before you're talking to your tenant. Whether that's your partner, whether that's your friend, whether that's the shower and you're just in there screaming, whatever it is, find an outlet first. Diffuse yourself before you respond. Take a minute, take a day, and ensure that whatever you're putting out there, number one, is going to be something that you would be willing to accept, right? Are you willing to receive what it is that you're about to put out there? If the answer is no, try again. Please think it over one more time. And it could take 5 times. There are days where I have to really, and sometimes I just have to get ChatGPT to do it. Like, just here's what I want to say, fix it. There are days, we all have it. So we're in a very emotional state of just human relationships. And on top of that, we have governments that are going bankrupt. We have, politicians that unfortunately maybe are not well equipped enough to make decisions. I don't want to say that they do it on purpose, but they don't make the best choices. And we need to figure out, number one, how are you going to ride this kind of hump? So make sure that you're not, make sure you've got reserves, make sure that you have things, and be ready to let go when it's time to let go. If that means you lost a little bit of money, I promise you're still ahead of the game. I promise, if you recognize today that it's time to get out and you lost $20,000, you are still ahead of holding on for another year and losing 100. Just because you get out, it doesn't mean you failed. Understanding that it's time to pivot is the biggest winning mindset behavior that you could possibly have. And we're so afraid of failure that we want to hold on for as long as we can. Don't do it. Be ready to shift, because the market is changing. And unfortunately, our politicians are really starting to get involved. So if you feel like it's a little bit unstable, maybe find a more stable option. And that could be as simple as just adding a garden suite, adding a secondary dwelling. It could just be mitigating the risk. So it's not one income that's determining the success of your portfolio. It's 2 or 3. It doesn't mean you have to offload. It just means you have to look at, how can I create more stability for myself? Emotions are unpredictable and you can't engage them. It's not math.
Well, Lena, just as you said, it's a small percentage of bad tenants that drive certain things. It happens on the other side too. And I had this conversation with a client of mine who's in the process of getting rid of all the residential investments because they're just finding it so frustrating. So it was frustrating enough dealing with some tenants.
Yeah.
Not, majority were paying, but there's some bad tenants. But it's now dealing with that extra layer that municipalities are imposing on them.
Yeah.
To make certain retrofit things, to improve certain things, and that comes from a few bad landlords. And
Absolutely.
it gets to the press, a few bad landlords that weren't doing things properly. It gets out there, and then you get some mayor saying, oh, we got to change this to protect. So we're going to impose something on all landlords, even though, we, instead of going after the bad landlords, we're going to impose something that we're going to make every landlord spend more money, earn less money because of it, because of a very small percentage of bad landlords weren't doing something. Like, it's so backwards. And I'm talking, having with my client, and they're saying, like, okay, that we're done. Like, we just, every time we think we're going to make a little bit of money on this, something new gets imposed on, and we're good landlords. Our tenants love us. We've done nothing wrong. We fix, we recock the bathtub when we're asked to do it, right?
Absolutely.
And they're flabbergasted, and because the politicians are responding to that small percentage and imposing stuff on everybody.
Absolutely. It goes both ways. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with people's livelihoods, which is exactly what we're doing, right? I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. It's your asset and it's your tenant's home. It's their stability. It's their heart. It's all of these things. So when you're dealing with that and your voter base, let's say, is dealing with all of these crises, you're not going to win. And it just takes 1, 2, 3 bad apples to poison the bunch, right? What I will say is many of the changes to the municipal rules and provincial rules tend to affect small residential landlords, right? So people who own generally less than 4 or 5 unit buildings. The bigger buildings generally don't get affected because a lot of the rules that they change, so things like compensation for personal use and all this other stuff that really was a big deal, you can't do it anyway in those kinds of buildings, so it doesn't really matter. also these delays and all of these other kind of, we need to have payment plans, and I'm going to give you a 2-year payment agreement, and you're only going to pay $50 towards your $100,000 of arrears. This doesn't affect the giant landlord who buys this 60, 70, 80 unit apartment building. They have the reserves. They have all of that additional income. So as a general whole, they're able to kind of negotiate something like that to begin with, and they work it in with their numbers. So if as a landlord, you feel like this pressure is nonstop and you need to get rid of your portfolio, one thing I might suggest is, if you are going to liquidate your residential portfolio, look at, is it possible to take what I've liquidated and invest into one larger building that won't be affected as much, because I've got reserves and I've got a very different tenant profile. Your profile of tenant is very different in a built for purpose apartment building than it is in a single family home. The mindset is different. The experience between landlord and tenant is different. So maybe don't like go right out, but just maybe go into a different asset class. Because I still believe in this. With all the lunacy and the insanity, I still believe that investing in property is the right way to go. I've never been a single family investor. I've always been kind of commercial residential, let's say. So if you are going to liquidate, just look at a different asset class, in my opinion.
Lena, that was going to be my final question for the podcast. With all the crazy that we just discussed, would you still be investing in the Canadian real estate market?
Absolutely. 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 And I would be investing in multifamily, 6 units or more. And I would be looking at 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units. That is currently what we look for. For us right now, we want to build them, not so much buy them. But as if I were starting today, that's what I would be looking for. 6 units, 2 to 3 bedroom split, maybe 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. But definitely, I still believe in our market. I still believe in our market because we're not cowboys.
Love it. Well, Lena, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a great conversation, and we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we covered lots of topics. And if you have any questions for Lena, reach out. Her and her husband have a wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, and they're always available to answer all your questions. So we thoroughly enjoyed your time. Thank you for coming back, and the David and David on Real Estate.
Thank you for having me. I very much enjoyed our conversation too.
This has been great. It's been educational, to say the least.
I'm glad. Good. My job has been done. Fantastic.
Thanks, Lena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.